Hey, this is Steven Speck, one of the managing partners here at Rust Belt Capital. Every week I'm putting together these videos where we're talking about wealth, how to create passive income streams, and how to make money in a manner that can protect you and your family going forward in the future. This is about creating generational and legacy wealth. That is what we're about, that's what I'm about, that's what my partner is about, that is what our company is about. Now today, what we're talking about in this video, or what I'm going to talk about in this video, is debt. Now, when a lot of us hear about debt, the first thing that comes to mind is a negative thought. Typically, it's bad. Debt is bad. If you've heard Dave Ramsey, that's a pretty big, metaphor for him or whatever, is all about no debt, no debt, no debt, no debt. Okay. Well, why is that? Is that actually true? Let's actually challenge that line of thinking, because maybe that's not true. Maybe what we heard from our parents or the talk that we hear from other people isn't true. Maybe what they're telling us isn't right. I would argue that there's such a thing as good debt and bad debt. And the reason I would argue that is from experience. I've made quite a bit of money using debt in a smart and good way. So let's first describe what is bad debt. What I would categorize as bad debt is consumer debt. Okay? What is consumer debt? Consumer debt, credit cards. Another one, cars. If you want to destroy your wealth, go borrow money to buy a car. Why? Because typically, historically, cars go down in value. So you're borrowing money on something that's going down in value. Okay? Credit cards. Why are credit cards bad? Okay? If you want to know a good investment, be the lender, be the credit card lender. Why? Because typically they charge something like 23% interest on an annual basis to somebody who holds a balance on it. 23% is pretty darn good. That's a really good return. What else is bad debt? Consumer debt, bad debt. Could be college degrees, okay? You go to a private school and pay $40,000 a year in tuition, and you're taking out this tuition to go get a humanities degree that isn't going to pay anything. I'm sorry, but that's bad debt, okay? What is good debt? So that's bad debt. This is where most people get trapped. They go out and buy a car. They pay $50,000, $80,000 for a car. They borrow money on the car. The car goes down in value, yet they're still paying for something that gets less and less valuable as time goes on. Credit cards. They rack up a bunch of debt, and then they're paying 23% a year to some investment guy like me, or like the people who invest with us. And then they wonder why they don't have a bunch of money. Okay? That's dumb debt. Don't do that. Okay? What's good debt, though? Good debt is productive debt. Good debt is, instead of spending money, I would argue, instead of spending money on a car, we're going to go out and buy a single-family rental, SFR. I don't know if you can see this. My camera is maybe not good enough to pick it up. But here's something that's easy to start with to wrap our head around. Why a single-family rental? I don't necessarily like single-family rentals, but it's small. It's relatable, so we'll start with it. With a single-family rental, you're buying a piece of real estate, okay? And when you buy real estate, what happens to real estate typically over time? Real estate goes up in value. So you're borrowing money to buy an asset that's going to go up in value. That's exactly different than cars. There's one difference. And that's a good difference, but that's not the best difference. The best difference that you can delineate and decide what is good debt and what is bad debt is who is paying for the debt. With a single-family rental, if you're doing it right, are you the landlord paying for the debt? No. Who's paying for it? The tenant. Somebody else is paying for your debt. All companies, the company that you probably work for, has debt. You need to borrow money to build buildings, build infrastructure, build technology stacks, different stuff like that. Somebody else is paying for the debt. When you were a kid and you lived in your house, okay, mom and dad probably owed a mortgage on the house. And you got all the benefits of living in the house. The house went up in value. I mean, it didn't really matter to you, but you had a roof over your head. You had a place to stay, a place to call home, all that type of stuff. Somebody else was paying for it. But you got all of the advantages of being there. When you can create a situation like that, that is good debt. Now, people would say debt might be risky. And I would say you've got to use your head when you're using debt, okay? Why does Dave Ramsey not like debt? Because Dave Ramsey violated some very simple rules that keep you out of trouble when using debt. We'll go over those rules in a second. That's actually going to be my last point of this video today, which we're not even close to yet, so keep that question in your mind, and we'll get to it. Now, the next thing we're going to talk about, yes, we're going to stay with this debt idea, but we're going to compare debt to equity, right? If I can turn this over, give me 1 second. Now, if you don't know what equity is, this word over here versus debt, equity is basically cash, ownership. Equity is ownership, right? So when you go and invest in the stock market, that's an equities market. You're buying ownership in the company. If you go buy a share of Microsoft, you own 1 share of ownership of Microsoft. Now, Microsoft has millions of shares, so it's a very small percentage of ownership, but you own some of the ownership of it. The difference between debt and equity, debt is not ownership. So when somebody lends you money to go buy a car, they don't own the car, you own the car, right? You buy it with your down payment, you sign the title, all that stuff. Equity is ownership. When we talk about price of these, because money has price, right? Interest rate is money, okay? Interest rate is the price of money, right? Which one is less expensive? Debt. Debt is cheaper than equity. How do I know this? Okay, if you go buy the S&P 500, what are you going to make in an average year? Generally, if you talk to a financial advisor, they're going to tell you something between 7, 8, 9, 10% per year is what you can rely on. If you bet on 7 or 8%, you're probably going to be, not disappointed. Over the last 5 to 10 years, the S&P 500 or the equities market has done very well. In the United States, it's much closer to the 10% or higher. So if we know that this equity, the minimum return if you go to the stock market, you just buy a simple index fund, you're going to make 10%, okay? Relatively, generally speaking. What about debt? Well, whether you know it right now or not, you're actually already in this position. Not that you own debt necessarily, but you're lending. You're a lender, right? Every time you put money in the bank is technically borrowing money from you to go lend out to other people. What do they charge you? Right now, most banks pay you 0% for that. 0, okay? Interest rate environment's changing, so maybe instead of paying you 0%, they're going to start paying a little bit more. They're going to pay something. Maybe they pay 2%. Or maybe you put it into a CD and they're going to pay you 4%. Now, if we put the hat on of investors, and you have to choose between where you want to source the majority of your money from, and the price is what you're paying, which would you rather pay, 10% or 4% or 10%? You'd rather use money that's 4% versus 10%. This is cheaper. Plus, you don't have to give up ownership of your investment, right? You use equity, not only do you have to hit at least 10% in terms of the price, it's expensive. You also give up your ownership. That's not cool. Decision making, stuff like that. Not cool. So equity is significantly more expensive than debt. Now maybe we should go back to a simple question and answer this too. Other than ownership and the price, what's the difference between equity and debt? Is debt still money? If you go borrow money from the bank, is it still money? Yeah. And equity ownership in, say, a company, could that be transformed into money? Yeah, it could. It has a monetary representation of it. So if we acknowledge that debt and equity can both be thought of relatively similar in terms of there's a monetary value to them, they can be used as money to some degree, why would we not try to use this more so than this? Okay? Those are some, basic finance concepts that we want to understand. Why doesn't everybody just use debt? Well, here you have to come up with the payment. With equity, you don't have to. Okay. To a degree, right? Your investors, if you don't make them a good return, they're not going to be happy. But, at the end of the day, that's part of the equity game. On the debt side, if you don't make your payment, guess what? Whoever lent you the money is going to come and try to take the asset from you, right? Take the investment from you. Okay, so with this, that's where the whole risk comes into play. And that's why you wouldn't want to use just 100% debt on something. Now, other than a debt is cheaper, okay, and other than you don't have to give up ownership of whatever investment or whatever asset you're buying when you use debt, why do I like debt? What's the more important reason that I like debt? And here's the more important reason. When we use debt on real estate when we go buy it, right? And typically we use something between a 3-to-1 and a 5-to-1 leverage ratio, meaning for every $1 of equity, this is equity, we use, we're going to also use, I messed that up. I'm supposed to write debt here. We're going to use $3 to $5 of debt, okay? Meaning, if we want to buy a $3 million asset, I don't know if you can see this, but I'm writing $3 million right here. So if we're going to buy a $3 million asset, we only have to come up with $1 million in cash. Okay? And this $1 million of cash, or equity, whatever you want to call it, is able to buy a $3 million asset. Let me ask you this. If you go to the stock market today, to the NASDAQ, and you look up the ticker symbol, MSFT, Microsoft, it's a company that I own, a company that I like. I should say I own some stock in it. I don't own it all, obviously. And you look at it today, the price per share is like $268. Pretty good price. For me to buy one share of Microsoft, I need to come up with $268. Okay? Could I borrow money to buy this? Sure. That's really dangerous and really stupid. It's called margin investing. Warren Buffett doesn't like that investing. I don't like that investing. And that's actually the exact reason I got into real estate, or got into what's called private placements, which is what we do at Rust Belt Capital. But the reason I did that is because in the stock market, if the price per share is $268, I got to come up with $268 to own that. Okay? I can't really borrow money to buy this. I can't come up with whatever a third is of 268, or I can't come up with $134 and say I'm going to buy one share of Microsoft with $134. So whatever the equity price is, the equity price is. Hopefully I'm not dragging on this concept. Okay? And if I do this, if I do decide to margin invest, guess what? Who pays the interest? I do. Okay? Why? Because the dividend on Microsoft right now is 0.84%. So the dividend is for every $268 I'm going to get paid annually. This is a percent. 0.83%. We go back to the debt side. I think I had it over here. If I can switch this over. How much is debt paying me? That's paying me 4%, and it's risk. It's not very risky, right? If I go lend to the bank or give them a CD or something like that, they're going to pay me 4%. They have to pay that 4%. If I go to Microsoft, I buy equity. I can't really borrow on Microsoft, and not in a good way. Yeah, I'm going to try to hit 10%, but they don't have to pay that. They don't have to pay their dividend either, right? They could suspend it at any point in time. Now, for me, 0.83% of a dividend on $268, I don't really like that. That's not really good. Plus, $268 is $268. There's no way that I can take leverage on it because I have to pay for it. And what do we say that one of the key things that distinguishes good debt from bad debt is identifying who has to pay the debt off. Good debt, somebody else is paying the debt off for you. Bad debt, you're paying. So that's why that's bad debt. That'd be like, well, I'm not going to say that because that's not great. So here's the key reason I like using debt, okay? Especially on private placements or real estate, okay? So at $3 million, we can buy a $3 million asset using $1 million of equity. Okay, so this is our asset. This is the value of it, and we bought it using only $1 million. Meaning, we're going to use $2 million of debt. Ooh, so risky. Not really. Here's why. Because we're going to go borrow $2 million. Actually, the interest rate's going to be different from what I'm going to tell you right now because the interest rate has changed, but we've actually used this scenario before. We're going to borrow $2 million at 4%. We've actually done this before. I borrowed this much money at 4%. And then we're going to fix this rate, this 4%, if you can see it. We're going to fix it for as long as possible, okay? Maybe we're going to fix it for 10 years. So on this $2 million, we're borrowing $2 million for 4%. We're going to go buy an asset, a piece of real estate. In this case, let's call it an apartment complex, $3 million. When we buy this $3 million piece of real estate, who's paying for the debt? Am I paying for it? Are you, the investor, paying for it? No. The tenants are, the people who live there. People who live there. So we got a $3 million asset for $1 million. What's this actually mean? If we're not the ones paying for the debt, this is the only real, and we did it right, this is the only real investment that we need in order to get this $3 million. And what do we need to do to take this $1 million and turn it into $3 million? If we hold on to it, if we just hold on to the property, then by the time we pay off the debt, which could be 20 years, 25 years, or 30 years, depending on what type of amortization schedule we chose, somebody else has paid us $2 million just for holding on to it. Now, earlier in this video, I also said that real estate tends to go up in value over time, right? Correct. So what's the likelihood if we buy this complex in a good area that in 30 years from now, it's worth more than $3 million? Say it's very, very, very likely. Okay? Probably 30 years from now, this thing's going to be worth $9 million. Okay? So we took $1 million, we turned it into $9 million. And we're going to get paid a dividend that is most likely much higher than 0.84%. Okay? And we have some say and control over that. That's one big reason debt is a good thing if you don't have quotation risk, if you're not using it in the stock market. What's the other crazy cool thing about it? If we borrowed that $2 million at 4%, and it was fixed for 10 years, this interest rate was fixed for 10 years, there's this funny thing called inflation. It's very talked about right now. What's inflation at? In the year 2023, you're not going to be able to borrow at 4% anymore. But in 2023, inflation's sitting around 4%. This is inflation. What is inflation? Inflation is the rate of devaluation of the dollar, right? So if we have 4% inflation at the beginning of the year, in January 1st, we have $1, and we wait till the end of the year, it's $4, then this is going to be worth like 96 cents. Okay? That's the buying power. So maybe at the beginning of the year, you could buy a cup of coffee for $1, but at the end of the year, it's $1.04. Okay? That means your dollar no longer has the ability to buy you one cup of coffee. You're saying, Stephen, how long has inflation been around? Inflation's been around for as long as time, but in the United States, if we look at the value of the dollar since the creation of the Federal Reserve banknote in 1913, the dollar has lost 99% of its value. Let me say that again. Since the dollar was established in 1913, the Federal Reserve in 1913, it has lost 99% of its value. So if you store $1 in the bank in 1913, you could buy the equivalent of whatever the hell $30 today could buy in 2023 dollars. But if you stored it in the bank as $1, guess what? Today, 110 years later, it's still $1. What can $1 buy you today? Can't even buy you a cup of coffee. So you really don't want to hold those dollars. But we can take advantage of that. We can game the system, per se. We do what the rich people do, wealthy people do, smart people do. They get somebody else who's going to give them money to borrow at 4% at a fixed rate. They go find an asset that somebody else will pay the debt on for them, and then they just hold on. Okay? Debt is money. All debt is money. Governments have tons of debt. Companies have tons of debt. The key is make sure that you're using debt wisely. Put it on good assets. Use good debt, not bad debt. Don't use debt on credit cards. I hate credit cards. I hate credit cards. I do not like borrowing money to buy cars. I have not done that, and I will not do that. I do not use money to borrow, or I do not borrow money to buy boats, and I have my name signed to millions and millions and millions of dollars of debt, okay? And I am 100% able to sleep easy at night because we follow those simple principles. That is fixed rate debt, okay? Go buy assets that somebody else is paying the debt for you. Do not go buy something that you have to pay the debt on yourself. Why does Dave Ramsey not like debt? I told you I would talk about that at the beginning of the video. Dave Ramsey doesn't like debt, even though he's a real estate guy, even though he bought real estate. The reason Dave Ramsey doesn't like debt is because when he got started in real estate and was using debt, he was using short maturity debt. That is, you know how we said if we borrow at 4%, we're going to fix the interest rate for as long as possible. and we're going to get term debt. What this means is that for, say, 10 years, we know very, very, very concretely what our debt costs are going to be. What Dave Ramsey did was get short-term notes. So our debt could be fixed for 10 years, amortized on a 30-year amortization schedule. His debt was fixed for 6 months, and then it ballooned. So he basically, for lack of a better understanding, was kind of buying a shit ton of real estate using not exactly lines of credit, but stuff that turned over really, really, really quickly. The problem with that is real estate's slower moving. It's not like I can go to the NYSE terminal tomorrow and say, hey, I want to offload this property that I bought 5 days ago. Can't do that. It can take a couple months to close a purchase or a sale of a property. So if you use short-term debt, short duration debt, you're using a tool that's not exactly ideal to use on this type of an asset, on this type of an investment. So what happened is the bank that he was borrowing from got bought out. The new bank was looking at all the risks, said, hey, we lent a bunch of money to a young guy that makes us scared or nervous, whatever. We're going to call his notes. Or we're just not going to refinance or redo his notes. So if he had $1 million borrowed, came to the end of the term, he couldn't find anybody to lend him that $1 million. He had to come up with $1 million. Okay? We try to be as risk averse as possible. That's why we use long-term debt. That's why I use fixed rate long-term debt when we go out and buy assets. Dave Ramsey got really burnt by it, never wanted to use debt again. It's fine, worked well for him. But debt is a very good tool if you know what you're doing, you're very careful with it, and you buy the right stuff and you use the right terms and schedules. It's what we do. Long story short, I hope this helped explain some things. I hope this was valuable for you. If it was, like, share, subscribe. Leave a comment down if you have any questions. I'll be sure to try and answer them. And I'll talk to you guys next week. See ya.